Good morning, everyone. This is Mike Pelletier again with yet another edition of the Unvarnished Truth. Today is Tuesday, November 22nd, 2016, and I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving in 2 days. What I wanted to talk to you about today was something that caught my attention and made me conduct some inquiries after the election. And that is the subject. I guess I'm expanding on my last edition of the Unvarnished Truth, where I talked about the fact that Hillary's victory in the general election in terms of the popular vote was largely the result of two states, New York and California, which are awash in debt. Well, I was just curious to see, broaden that inquiry and to take a look at the question of debt in the states and how that played into the presidential race. And I made some interesting discoveries. I mean, I thought, that it was going to be kind of, the result would be partisan. And you can argue that the results suggest that Republicans are better managers of debt than Democrats. And I think that is a fair conclusion. Yet the debt situation in the states is so disturbing that, I guess I just like to sound an alarm bell generally about the matter of state debt. Now, I've talked at great length about the fact that the federal government is $19.8 trillion in debt, and that's growing by about half trillion dollars a year. But let's get right to it. So in any event, 20 states voted for Clinton in the Electoral College. She won 20 states in the Electoral College. Those states in the aggregate have $1.7 trillion in debt. Now, bear in mind that unlike the federal government, which can print money to pay off its debts, which has disastrous long-term consequences if it just prints money, in terms of inflation and the value of the dollar and all that. The states can't do that. States can't print money. So these states are stuck. And exactly how Washington pays off $77 billion in debt, California, $473 billion in debt. Illinois, $163 billion in debt. New York, Illinois' financial condition is preposterous. New York, $359.8 billion, really $360 billion in debt. Massachusetts, $91 billion in debt. New Jersey, $110 billion in debt. Hawaii, $15 billion in debt with a population, barely over 1 million. In any event, the average, the 20 states that voted for Clinton in the Electoral College have an aggregate of $1.7 trillion in indebtedness, an average of $85 billion apiece. Now, you bear in mind that $1 billion is 1,000 millions, and states can't print money. How these states generate surpluses of on average of $85 billion to pay off their indebtedness, I don't know that they ever will. So let's compare that to the Republican states, or the states that the 29 states, unbelievably, Michigan. What are we now? 14 days after the election, has still not certified its results, although 100% of the vote has been in since the day after the election. So 29 states were awarded to Trump in the Electoral College. Florida has $136 billion in indebtedness. Texas, $285.6 billion in indebtedness. Ohio, $87.5 billion. Pennsylvania, $136.6 billion. Those are the leading contenders for being completely financially screwed. In any event, those 29 states, I may have made a miscalculation because I divided initially by 30. Shouldn't be 29. So those states have a combined indebtedness of $1.3 trillion and an average indebtedness of $44.9 billion. So 29 states voted for Trump with an aggregate debt of $1.3 trillion. 30 states voted for Clinton with an aggregate $1.7 trillion. The average indebtedness of the states that voted for Clinton is $85 billion. The average indebtedness of the states that voted for Trump is $44.9 billion. Okay, now, yeah, I suppose that analysis, so that does seem to suggest that states that voted Republican are better managers of their debt generally than states that voted Democrat. But you could make the argument that, most of the large states with large urban areas, more population, would, of course, have larger indebtedness, and those are the states that voted for Clinton. So that analysis may be a little suspect. So let's take a look at it another way. There are 6 states controlled by the Democrats, only 6 in this country, and by that I mean a Democrat governor and both houses. Or if only one, I think there's only one state with a unicameral legislature, that is one house, and that's Nebraska. So 6 states are controlled by the Democrats with a Democrat governor and Democrat control of both houses of their legislature. California, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Oregon, and Rhode Island. Now, I've calculated the gross indebtedness of those states already. I figured that into the earlier statistics I gave you. But California's debt per citizen is $12,000. Connecticut's is $13,000. Delaware's is $7,500. Hawaii's is $10,700. Oregon's is about $10,000. Rhode Island's is about $11,000. The average debt per citizen of those 6 states is $10,741. Now that's a significant amount of debt per citizen, bearing in mind, number one, that all of these state indebtedness figures exclude unfunded pension liabilities and exclude federal indebtedness. So the average debt, state debt per citizen in the 6 states controlled by Democrats is $10,741. The Republicans control 26 states, Republican governor, Republican both houses except Nebraska, which only has one house, which is Republican. 26 states are controlled by Republicans. And, no question, a lot of them are the smaller, but I think the debt per citizen kind of renders the question who has the larger populations debt per citizen calculation, renders that irrelevant. The fact that Democrat, California, for example, has a much larger population than any other state. That's why it has 55 electoral votes. But that is negated by the fact that it is, when I talk about debt per citizen. Interestingly, I would say, in going back to the Democrats for just a minute, Connecticut has a higher debt per citizen than California. Connecticut is 13,140. California is 12,078. Even though California's indebtedness is $473 billion, Connecticut's is $47.2 billion, but because it has a much smaller population, the debt per citizen is actually $1,000 higher in Connecticut. Anyway, going back to the Republicans. The Republican states have an average debt per citizen. The 26 states controlled by Republicans have an average debt per citizen of $6,736. So, to summarize, the states that voted for Clinton in the Electoral College average debt of $85 billion. The states that voted for Trump in the Electoral College average debt of $45 billion. The states controlled by Democrats average debt per, the 6 states, average debt per citizen of $10,700. States controlled by Republicans, average debt per citizen of $6,700. So there is significant less indebtedness in states that voted Republican or are controlled by Republican. I think that is a fair conclusion from the data. But I would just say that in general, what I discovered in this inquiry is that the state indebtedness is an alarming issue. You take the aggregate state indebtedness of those states voting for Clinton of $1.7 trillion and those states voting for Trump of $1.3 trillion, you have $3 trillion in state indebtedness, and they can't print money to pay off their debts. I mean, they've got to generate budget surpluses, and I don't know how you do that, in the states, generate budget surpluses. So you have to add that $3 trillion in state indebtedness to the federal debt of $19.8 trillion. And bear in mind that both of those calculations of indebtedness, aggregate of 19.8 plus 3, 22.8 trillion, exclude in the states unfunded pension obligations, which are just staggering, for police, fire, teachers, state employees, just staggering. And the $19.8 trillion in federal indebtedness excludes unfunded liabilities for Medicare, Social Security, and Obamacare. I've heard calculations as high as $130 trillion when you include the unfunded entitlement obligations of the federal government. So, all this talk about inclusiveness and racism and Black Lives Matters and immigration and should there be a Muslim registry and what should we do about ISIS and what should we do about Russia? These are all secondary, tertiary issues. What are we going to do about our debt, which is, I don't know, $150 trillion if you include unfunded obligations for Social Security, Medicare, Obamacare, and the state pensions, and add the $19.7 trillion in federal debt and the $3 trillion in state debt. I don't know what we're talking about. $150 trillion, that's 2 or 3 times the total amount of money in the entire world. So that's all I can do is laugh. We are fucked That's all from here for the Unvarnished Truth on Tuesday, November 22nd, 2016. And on that note, have a very happy Thanksgiving.